The evening was quiet, unusually so, as if the world had paused just outside Lena's window, letting the soft hum of the city fade into distant whispers, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the faint ticking of a clock that seemed louder than normal. She had grown used to evenings like this since the divorce, where silence settled over her apartment like a blanket, comforting and heavy at the same time, reminding her of the spaces left behind by people who were no longer there, of laughter that once filled rooms now hollow, and of moments she wished she could relive but could not. And tonight, as the rain began tapping gently against the glass, each drop carrying its own rhythm of memories, she tried to keep at bay. She felt that strange mix of peace and longing, the kind that made her heart ache in ways she didn't fully understand, and she poured herself a cup of tea, the warmth spreading through her palms, grounding her while her mind drifted to places both tender and painful. Places where she remembered Noah, her ex-husband's son, not as a grown man but as the awkward, quiet boy who had once clung to her presence in ways that made her feel protective and alive, a boy who had taught her patience, empathy, and the subtle art of understanding someone who carried the weight of a broken home. She had not expected to see him again, not tonight, not ever, yet there was a knock at her door, careful, hesitant, almost shy, and it stirred something in her chest she hadn't felt in years, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and a faint spark of something she could not name. And when she opened the door, there he was, standing under the dim light of the hallway, water dripping from the hem of his coat, his hair damp, his expression unreadable, a mixture of nervousness and resolve that immediately captured her attention, making her heart beat a little faster even as her mind raced through a dozen questions she didn't know how to ask. And he said softly, almost as if speaking too loudly could break the fragile moment, "Can we talk?" 3 simple words that carried the weight of years, the kind of words that could open old wounds or build bridges over them. And Lena, feeling both hesitant and compelled, stepped aside, silently inviting him in, aware that the decision to let him enter her home would change the night, and perhaps, she sensed, something more within herself, because as he entered, there was an air of tension and nostalgia mixed together, a quiet acknowledgement of the past and the invisible threads that still connected them despite time, distance, and the barriers of grown-up life. And they moved to the living room, settling across from each other, the space between them alive with unspoken questions, memories of shared dinners, whispered secrets, small arguments, laughter, and tears, everything compressed into the weight of a single, quiet evening. And Noah began to speak, his voice low and careful, revealing the hours of thought he had put into this encounter, the rehearsed beginnings, the pauses, the way he had weighed each word so that it might reach Lena's heart without causing unnecessary pain. And he started not with demands or complaints, but with memories, the little moments she remembered fondly, moments she thought had faded. Like the way he had once smiled at her from the back seat of a car, the way he had nervously asked for advice about school, the way he had clung to her when storms or arguments made him feel small and unsure. And as he spoke, Lena felt warmth and sorrow intertwined, a deep tug at her heart she hadn't anticipated, because here was someone she had loved, not in a romantic way, but with the kind of love that forms quietly, intimately, through care, guidance, and shared vulnerability. And he was now standing before her as a young man, changed yet familiar, carrying pieces of her past, her choices, her mistakes, her triumphs, in ways she couldn't untangle. And she listened, breath shallow, eyes slightly moist, every word sinking in like rain into soil, seeping into the corners of her mind, filling gaps she hadn't realized were empty, reminding her of the fragility and beauty of human connection. And as Noah's story unfolded, he began to hint at feelings he had struggled with silently, the kind of truth that is easier to hide than to speak, the kind that can make a person tremble because speaking it changes everything and nothing at once. And Lena felt herself leaning slightly forward, drawn in by the honesty, the vulnerability, and the quiet courage it took for him to stand in her living room and say what he had come to say without expectation, without judgment, just sharing. And she realized that this night, this unexpected visit, was not just about nostalgia or unfinished business, but about the raw, unpolished truth of emotions that linger long after events have passed, the way people leave marks on your heart, invisible but permanent, shaping who you are and how you feel even when you think you've moved on. And in that moment, Lena understood that she could not predict how she would respond, could not shield herself completely from the pull of familiarity, the surge of protective instinct, the tender ache of seeing someone she cared about grown into their own person. Someone who now faced her not as a boy in need of guidance but as a man with his own fears, regrets, and hopes. And as the rain continued to fall outside, filling the room with its soft, rhythmic music, she realized the evening would stretch longer than she imagined. Filled with confessions, pauses, laughter, and perhaps tears, and that what began as a simple knock at the door had already begun to unravel the walls she had built around her heart, leaving her unsure, anxious, yet strangely ready to listen, to understand, to face what was coming, because sometimes life sneaks up quietly like rain tapping on windows, and in that quiet, it can change everything in ways you never saw coming. The room felt heavier now, filled with the soft glow of the lamp in the corner, shadows stretching across the walls as if waiting for the conversation to unfold, and Lena sat on the couch, hands folded loosely in her lap, trying to steady the rapid beat of her heart while Noah settled across from her, shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes flicking to the floor before meeting hers, a hesitant bridge between past and present forming in the quiet tension that filled the space. And as he began to speak, each word deliberate and measured, she felt a tug of curiosity, mixed with fear, because what he was about to say carried weight beyond ordinary conversation. It carried pieces of memory, longing, and honesty that could stir emotions she had kept carefully tucked away. Yet he started not with accusations or blame, but with gentle reflections, small confessions about the difficulties he had faced after the divorce, the way he had felt lost at times, the nights he had lain awake thinking of how things could have been different. And Lena felt a lump rise in her throat, recognizing the pain in his voice, the same pain she had once felt when love and life had shifted in ways she could not control. And he spoke about her with a kind of reverence, describing moments she barely remembered herself, the way she had always listened, the way she had offered comfort without judgment, how her presence had been a steadying force when his own world had seemed unstable. And with each memory, Lena's chest tightened, warmth mixing with the ache of nostalgia. Because these were moments that mattered, moments that shaped him, and hearing them now as a young man's perspective made her realize how deeply influence travels, how care and attention can leave invisible footprints on someone's heart. And Noah paused, swallowing hard, fingers brushing the edge of the coffee table as if he needed physical contact to steady the whirlwind of emotion he was releasing, then continued, admitting quietly that he had always admired her, that he had sometimes envied the way she carried herself through hardship, the way she spoke gently yet firmly, the way she managed to keep compassion alive even when life had taken so much from her. And Lena felt her own defenses soften, the years of polite distance she had maintained suddenly feeling fragile, as if they had been paper walls waiting for a moment like this to be tested. And as he shared these reflections, there was an undercurrent of something more, a tender thread woven between honesty and emotion, hinting at feelings that were complex, layered, and difficult to name. And Lena, aware of the boundaries, the history, and the potential consequences, found herself caught between empathy, protectiveness, and the undeniable stirrings of connection that defied logic. For here was someone she had cared for in a different time and context, now grown, vulnerable, yet strong enough to speak, and the honesty in his voice demanded acknowledgement, demanded presence, demanded that she engage not as a passive listener but as someone who could respond with the same truthfulness. And as he talked, he revealed the quiet ways he had struggled to process emotions, the nights he had thought about what family meant, about love and loss, about the fragile balance between holding on and letting go. And Lena felt a wave of recognition, because she too had faced the same questions, the same restless nights, the same tug of heartstrings that refused to be ignored. And there was an intimacy in this shared understanding, even if it had taken years and distance to arrive at this point. And as he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a softer, more vulnerable tone, he confessed that some of his admiration had grown into something deeper, something he hadn't dared to name before, a feeling that existed quietly, unspoken, lurking in moments when he remembered laughter, arguments, quiet talks, and small gestures of care. And Lena's breath caught, not from surprise alone, but from the recognition of truth, because she understood what it meant to feel deeply for someone in ways that are complicated, that don't fit neatly into boundaries or societal expectations, that make you question your own heart and the lines you've drawn around it. And she noticed the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his hands tightened, the way his gaze lingered, the way his voice wavered at times, revealing the courage it took to speak what had long been silent. and Lena realized that listening now required courage of her own, a willingness to feel, to hold space for someone else's truth while navigating her own conflicting emotions, and as he spoke, she felt herself transported through memory and possibility, recalling moments she had forgotten, imagining moments that could be, and sensing that life had presented her with a rare, delicate intersection of past and present, of mentorship and emotional intimacy, of reflection and unspoken longing, and she also felt the responsibility of the moment, the understanding that honesty can be a fragile thing, that words once spoken cannot be taken back, that hearts once stirred may not find immediate resolution, and yet, there was a beauty in the act itself, a purity and vulnerability that demanded acknowledgement, and as Noah's sentences flowed, his pauses filled with unspoken meaning, Lena felt the room shrink, the outside world fading to a distant hum, leaving just the two of them, connected by shared history, empathy, and the quiet tension of emotions that were too large to name, too nuanced to simplify, and too human to ignore. And she marveled at the complexity of the moment, how life could surprise her in the quietest of ways, how the person she had known as a boy had grown into someone capable of honesty, of reflection, of courage, and how that honesty could affect her, awaken dormant feelings, stir compassion, admiration, and something tender that she hadn't expected, and when he finally paused, looking at her with a mixture of hope and fear, Lena felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing gently against her heart, the soft ache of connection that she had thought was long past, and she realized that this conversation was no longer simply about the past, it was about emotions, about acknowledgement, about understanding someone fully, and about holding a moment in its fragile perfection, knowing that after it passed, nothing would be exactly the same. And as the rain continued to tap on the windows, a quiet accompaniment to their words, Lena understood that life had gifted her a rare, intimate truth, that even in its complexity and risk, it was worth being present, worth listening, worth feeling deeply, and in that shared space, with hearts quietly trembling yet open, they continued to talk, bridging the gap of years, of silence, of longing, each word a small step toward understanding, each pause a universe of emotion, leaving both of them changed, suspended in a delicate balance of what was said, what was felt, and what might follow, knowing that some moments stay with you forever, echoing quietly in memory long after they have passed. The room felt charged now, thick with anticipation. The quiet hum of the rain outside creating a gentle rhythm that mirrored the tension between them, and Lena could feel her heartbeat accelerating as Noah shifted slightly in his seat, hands clasped together as if holding himself steady against the storm of emotions he was about to release, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, yet trembling at the edges, carrying the weight of honesty, vulnerability, and courage, and he admitted, without hesitation this time, that his feelings were more complicated than he had ever allowed himself to say aloud, that he had tried for years to ignore the stirrings in his heart, to suppress emotions that seemed impossible to name, emotions that had grown quietly in the spaces between childhood memories, past confusions, and present admiration, and Lena felt a mixture of surprise, apprehension, and a strange, tender warmth rise in her chest, because here was a young man she had cared for in a familial, protective way, now standing before her as someone who had grown, matured, and yet still carried pieces of her influence, her care, her guidance, and as he continued, he explained that he had no expectations, that he did not ask for reciprocation, that he simply needed to share his truth, to speak aloud the emotions that had lingered too long in silence, and Lena, listening intently, felt the delicate balance of empathy, admiration, and something deeper, a pull she could not fully define, stirring within her heart as she considered the courage it took for him to be this honest, and the trust he placed in her by choosing to speak, knowing that the truth could bring relief, confusion, or even distance, and she recognized the magnitude of the moment, how life often delivers pivotal experiences when least expected, how emotions can grow quietly under the surface, unnoticed, and then demand acknowledgement with a force that feels both exhilarating and terrifying, and as Noah's gaze met hers, full of sincerity and a hint of fear, she saw not just the boy she had known, not just the son of her past love, but a man standing vulnerably, capable of reflection, capable of facing feelings most people hide, and the realization made her chest ache with empathy, admiration, and a subtle awareness of the complex interplay of connection, attraction, and shared history, and as he described the nights he had spent reflecting on her kindness, on the moments she had unknowingly impacted him, on the way he had felt drawn to her presence, Lena felt an unusual mix of emotions, a combination of longing, protectiveness, and an unexpected stir of curiosity and fascination that made her aware of her own heart in ways she hadn't considered in years, and she caught herself leaning in slightly, drawn not only by the content of his words but by the rawness of his honesty, the purity of the emotion, the courage it took to risk judgment in order to speak truthfully, and she realized that life had placed them in this quiet, intimate space for a reason, that the universe had orchestrated a moment where honesty and emotion collided, creating a fragile, beautiful tension between the past and present, between memory and desire, and as Noah's confession deepened, he described the nights when he had thought of what could have been, the regrets that lingered from their shared past, the subtle admiration that had grown into feelings he didn't dare name, and Lena felt the soft pull of empathy, of understanding, and even a subtle awakening within herself, emotions that were tender, confusing, yet undeniably present, reminding her that human hearts rarely follow logic and that sometimes feelings emerge where we least expect them, uninvited yet compelling, and as she absorbed his words, she noticed the small signs of vulnerability in him, the slight tremble in his voice, the way his hands fidgeted with invisible tension, the careful pauses between sentences, each gesture speaking louder than any words could, each moment revealing the depth of emotion he had carried alone for so long, and Lena felt an almost magnetic draw toward the raw honesty, a desire to respond not just with words but with understanding, presence, and recognition of the courage it had taken for him to reveal this layer of himself, and as he spoke of the complexity of his emotions, of the conflict between respect, admiration, and the deeper feelings he had struggled to understand, Lena's mind raced through memories, reflections, and possibilities, the past and present colliding in a delicate balance, making her aware of her own heart's capacity for connection, for care, for emotions she had thought she had contained, and yet here, in this quiet room, with the rain tapping softly on the windows and the night stretching endlessly beyond, she felt the undeniable weight of intimacy, a connection forged not through romance alone but through shared history, vulnerability, and the courage to speak truth, and as Noah's sentences grew more open, more honest, he admitted that the emotions he felt were not fleeting or superficial, that they had lingered, grown, and evolved quietly alongside memories of her guidance, kindness, and presence, and Lena felt a mixture of awe, tenderness, and a subtle, stirring curiosity about what these emotions could mean, how they might shape the dynamics between them, and how simply listening, holding space, and acknowledging truth could create a profound impact, and she noticed how her own chest tightened, how her thoughts raced, how a quiet warmth spread within her as she realized that this moment was both delicate and transformative, a rare intersection of honesty, reflection, and human connection, and as Noah finally paused, looking at her with a combination of hope, fear, and quiet relief, Lena understood that they had crossed an invisible threshold, that words had been shared that could not be undone, that hearts had been opened in ways that demanded recognition, and that the path forward was uncertain, layered with emotion, reflection, and possibilities, both thrilling and daunting, and in that silence that followed, filled with the soft patter of rain and the gentle hum of the night, Lena felt the profound weight of what had been spoken, the tenderness of the connection, and the stirring of feelings that would not fade easily, a mixture of empathy, admiration, and an awakening of desire tempered by wisdom, experience, and the complexity of human hearts, and she knew that the evening had shifted something quietly but irreversibly, that the honesty between them had opened doors to emotions long held at bay, and that the choices made from this point forward would carry the echoes of this confession, shaping thoughts, feelings, and possibilities in ways neither of them could yet fully understand, leaving them suspended in the delicate balance between past, present, and the unspoken future, hearts quietly trembling, minds racing, emotions awakened, and lives touched forever by a simple, brave act of truth. The night grew quieter as the rain eased, leaving only the soft hum of droplets on the window, and Lena remained seated, her hands loosely folded, heart still racing from Noah's confession, the weight of his honesty settling in her chest like a gentle, insistent pressure, and she realized that the room was no longer just a space of memories, but a place alive with emotion, possibility, and reflection, where past and present converged in ways she had not anticipated, and she spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, telling Noah how much she appreciated his courage, how deeply his honesty had touched her, and how rare it was to witness such vulnerability. And he listened, eyes wide, holding himself still as if her response might shatter the fragile bubble that surrounded them, and she continued, admitting that his words had stirred feelings she thought she had buried long ago. Feelings that were complex, tender, and impossible to ignore, and yet, she explained, she could not answer fully in that moment, could not promise reciprocation or certainty, because emotions that grow quietly, that linger in the shadows, require time to understand, reflection to process, and care to navigate without causing harm. And Noah nodded, a mix of relief and lingering tension in his gaze, understanding without pressing, showing patience that mirrored the thoughtfulness he had always carried. And Lena felt a swell of affection, a soft ache of connection, and a subtle awareness of the bond between them that had evolved from past familiarity into present intimacy, one defined not by expectation but by honesty and trust. And as she spoke, she described her own journey, the nights she had spent reconciling the past, the ways she had tried to protect her heart while remaining open to life's surprises, the quiet longing she had felt for understanding, companionship, and someone who could see her fully without judgment. And Noah listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes silent, absorbing not just the words but the emotion behind them, the cadence, the pauses, the unspoken resonance that filled the spaces between sentences, and she could feel the room vibrating softly with the weight of shared humanity, the delicate threads that connect people who care, who remember, who acknowledge each other's hearts without expectation. And as the conversation deepened, Lena realized how rare this moment was, how extraordinary it was to witness truth spoken so openly, how it transformed the ordinary evening into something profound, tender, and quietly magical. And Noah, encouraged by her sincerity, continued to speak about his own journey, about learning to face feelings with honesty, about understanding the difference between fleeting attraction and deeper connection, about the ways he had tried to reconcile admiration, affection, and respect into a coherent understanding of his emotions. And Lena felt a wave of empathy and recognition, because she too had grappled with complex emotions, had felt the pull of someone's presence, the stirrings of desire tempered by caution, and the need to balance honesty with care. And together they navigated the intricate landscape of feelings, mapping unspoken truths, acknowledging vulnerability, and creating a space where hearts could meet without fear of judgment, without pressure to act prematurely, where presence alone was an act of intimacy. And as they talked, she noticed the subtle shifts in him, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his voice steadied, the way his gaze lingered with a mix of gratitude and quiet longing. And she too felt herself softening, opening to the awareness that human connection is rarely linear, often unpredictable, and yet, in its unpredictability lies beauty, tenderness, and the opportunity for growth, understanding, and unexpected warmth. And as the minutes turned into hours, they shared small stories, recollections of past moments that carried weight and meaning, reflections on life, love, and the choices that had brought them here. And Lena found herself laughing softly at memories she had almost forgotten, feeling the lightness that comes from genuine companionship, the relief of recognition, and the deep satisfaction of being seen, truly seen, for who she was. And Noah's presence brought a balance to the room, a calm energy, a gentle reminder of the ties that bind people through empathy, honesty, and shared history. And when he finally stood to leave, there was no abrupt ending, only a slow, mutual acknowledgement of what had passed, a quiet understanding that this moment, delicate and fleeting, had changed them both, that it would linger in memory, shaping thoughts, stirring emotions, and inspiring reflection long after the door closed. And as he walked toward the door, Lena felt a mixture of sadness and peace, the ache of departure tempered by the gratitude for the connection. And she realized that some moments do not require resolution to matter, that some truths, once spoken, plant seeds that grow quietly over time, leaving a lasting imprint on the heart. And as Noah stepped into the night, leaving the soft echo of his presence behind, Lena remained still, listening to the fading rain, feeling the room settle around her. And she reflected on the honesty they had shared, the vulnerability they had both shown, the courage it took to speak and to listen. And she understood that this evening would remain with her forever, a quiet, beautiful memory, a gentle reminder of how life can surprise, move, and stir the heart in ways we never anticipate. And even after the door clicked shut, even after the footsteps faded down the hallway, she felt the echo of his words, the resonance of his truth, lingering softly, like a melody that stays long after the song has ended, and she smiled faintly, feeling a tender warmth, a quiet hope, and the deep, lingering knowledge that hearts, when met with honesty and care, leave traces that time cannot erase, leaving her thinking, remembering, feeling, and dreaming about that night, about the courage it took to speak, the patience it took to listen, and the quiet, beautiful, lasting impact of one honest, heartfelt conversation that changed everything in subtle, unforgettable ways.